When my daughter uploaded the diary I'd written for her over 10 years, with the caption, "This man thinks he's my father," my hands went cold. Within 24 hours, strangers across the internet called me delusional, a stalker, a failure. But none of them had ever held that little girl's hand in a hospital room or cried alone in a parked car because the court said, "No visitation this Christmas." I had written to her every day since the age of 8. I missed birthdays, her first recital, her graduation, not by choice, but by absence that felt like punishment. The diary wasn't a trophy. It was my apology, my lifeline. And now, it was public property. Comments poured in, "What kind of psycho does this?" Deadbeat trying to buy sympathy. One even said, "If I were her, I'd block him too." But they didn't know what came next. They didn't know the messages my daughter received from people who had longed for a father like me, or the photo that surfaced of her as a child, smiling beside a fence, with me watching from the shadows. They didn't know the one line in the diary that broke her. Before we dive into how a single caption nearly destroyed any chance at redemption, and how one dinner invitation changed everything, make sure you're ready to question what you'd do if the person who hurt you never stopped loving you. Because this story, it's not about forgiveness. It's about the long, bloody road toward being seen. August 14th, 2005. You turned 8 today. I watched you blow out the candles from the parking lot across the street. Your mom didn't know I was there. You didn't either. But you smiled so wide, sweetheart. That smile alone kept me breathing another year. I wrote this, hoping that someday you'll read it and know that even in silence, I never stopped being your dad. My name is Nathaniel Brooks. I'm 62 years old, widowed, and I live alone in a quiet 2-bedroom house in Boise, Idaho. Most days, the only conversation I have is with my coffee maker. I used to teach high school English, then retired early when my wife, Ellen, passed away from breast cancer. That was 10 years ago. Life after her became flat, like someone turned the world's volume down. I spend my mornings tending to a stubborn garden and my afternoons writing letters that never get sent. But there's one thing I've done every single day for the last decade. Write to my daughter, Avery, not through texts or emails. No, I've kept a journal. A black, leather-bound notebook I bought from a thrift store the day Avery turned 8. It wasn't supposed to be a 10-year ritual. It started as guilt. That year, I forgot her birthday. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know if I had the right to remember. After the divorce, Ellen moved Avery to Oregon and cut off all contact. I didn't fight it. I thought giving her space was the right thing. I thought I'd ruined enough, but silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like punishment. So I wrote. That night, I scribbled the first entry in what would become a 1,000-page apology. Not dramatic, just honest. I wrote about the birthday I missed, about the princess dress she used to wear, about the way she clung to my leg at the zoo when the flamingos got too loud. Little things. Things I was terrified time would erase. Writing became the only way I knew how to stay connected without causing harm. I didn't want to show up and be turned away. I didn't want to scare her. So instead, I put my fatherhood into ink, page by page. I wrote when I saw her high school photo in the local paper, when I heard her name mentioned by a distant friend, when I stood behind a tree at her graduation ceremony, just close enough to hear her name called, just far enough not to ruin it. Each entry began with the same phrase, "Dear Avery." Some days were long reflections, others just a line or two. I never missed a day. Even during the flu, even during my surgery last year when they removed a tumor from my colon, I dictated entries to the nurse and paid her $50 not to tell anyone. The journal became sacred, not a place for perfect prose, but for proof. Proof that I tried, that I remembered, that I didn't vanish by choice. When Ellen died 3 years ago, I waited 6 months before mailing the journal to Avery. I wrapped it in brown paper, wrote a note on the inside cover. This isn't a plea, it's a map, in case you ever want to find your way back. And then I waited. Weeks passed, then months. No reply. I told myself that maybe the package got lost. Maybe she hadn't opened it. Maybe she did, and threw it away. I kept writing anyway. Started a second journal, this time with fewer memories, more questions. What was your first heartbreak? Do you still sing in the shower? Did you get the scholarship to Berkeley? Until one day last month, I logged onto Instagram for the first time in 4 years. I didn't expect to see her face. I didn't expect to see my handwriting, photographed, page by page, uploaded to her feed. And I certainly didn't expect the caption beneath it. This man thinks he's my father. I stared at that screen for hours, not because of what she said, but because of what it meant. She read it. She really read it, even if she hated it, even if she hated me. She opened the damn journal, and now everything's about to change. I remember the last day I held her hand. Avery was 6, and we were in the parking lot outside her school. Ellen had just told me she wanted full custody. We'd been fighting for months, quiet, cutting arguments that left no bruises but plenty of scars. Ellen didn't scream. She just unraveled, bit by bit. The truth was, I wasn't a good husband. I worked long hours, missed dinner, forgot anniversaries. I thought providing was enough. It wasn't. The judge agreed with her. Unstable emotional environment, he said. No history of abuse, no violence, just absence. That was my crime. I wasn't there when Ellen miscarried our second child. I wasn't there when her mother died. I was at school, grading essays and running debate club, telling myself I was doing it for the family. I told Ellen I'd fight for joint custody. She looked me in the eye and asked, "Why? To ease your guilt or to raise your daughter?" I didn't answer. That silence cost me visitation rights. I thought stepping back would be noble. I thought I was giving Avery a chance to grow up without the tension. I told myself it was temporary. But temporary turned into birthdays I wasn't invited to, into photos I wasn't tagged in, into holidays I spent alone, eating frozen dinners and wondering if she'd forgotten the sound of my voice. I missed her first ballet recital. Ellen had told me not to come, said Avery would be too distracted. I parked 3 blocks away and watched from the side entrance through a small glass pane in the door. She was wearing a purple tutu, her hair in a bun that kept slipping. I saw her fall, get back up, smile like nothing happened. I wanted to run in and hug her, but I didn't even clap. I missed her 10th birthday. I sent a gift, a necklace with her initials engraved. It came back unopened. I still have it. It sits in my sock drawer next to a copy of Charlotte's Web I bought for her first day of 2nd grade. I missed her high school graduation, found out about it from a mutual acquaintance who saw it in the paper. I stood behind the football field fence, far from the crowd, watching through binoculars like a criminal. She looked radiant in her cap and gown. I tried to memorize the moment, the way her hair caught the wind, the way she threw her arms around a friend afterward. I left before the speeches ended. There was one winter afternoon. I think she was around 12. I drove to Oregon just to see the house she lived in. I parked across the street, engine off, windows rolled down, listening for her laugh. She came out once, wearing a beanie and carrying a snow globe. I watched her build a lopsided snowman with a friend. I never left the car. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Those years were a slow death. Not dramatic, just quietly excruciating. I filled notebooks with imaginary conversations. What I'd say if I saw her at the grocery store. How I'd react if she ever knocked on my door. I wrote letters I never mailed. Bought gifts I never sent. Told people I didn't have children. Because it was easier than explaining why I wasn't in her life. People assume absence is a choice. Sometimes it's a consequence of shame, of fear, of believing you're the villain in someone else's story. I thought if I stayed away, I'd protect her from the mess I had become. I didn't realize that absence leaves its own kind of mess. There were moments I almost called. When Ellen passed, I held the phone for hours, staring at the contact labeled Avery, Do Not Disturb. I rehearsed voicemails, deleted drafts, drank whiskey straight from the bottle until my courage curdled into silence. I watched from a distance because I thought I didn't deserve to be closer. But a man can only sit in the shadows for so long before he starts to forget what sunlight feels like. That's when I started the journal. I wrote about the life I imagined she was living, about the memories I hoped she was making. I tried to stitch together the empty years with ink and paper. It wasn't enough. But it was something. And now, after all those years of watching from the fence line, she's finally seen what I wrote. I just don't know if she sees me. At first, it felt strange, writing to someone who might never read a single word. But somewhere between the 5th and 50th entry, it stopped being about her and started being about me. About healing. About remembering. About building a bridge to a place I might never be allowed to cross. I didn't plan it. The first entry came on a whim, scribbled on a receipt in the middle of the night. Dear Avery, I don't know what kind of music you like now, but I remember how you used to sing Yellow Submarine at the top of your lungs, and it still makes me smile. The next day, I bought a proper notebook, a plain black leather-bound journal that smelled faintly of dust and regret. I wrote again and again until it became routine. Every night, before brushing my teeth, I sat at the kitchen table, opened the journal, and gave her a piece of my day. Sometimes it was a memory, sometimes a question, sometimes just a weather report, and a wish that she wasn't caught in the rain. The entries weren't polished or poetic. I didn't try to be impressive. I was just honest, raw, often messy. Some pages had coffee stains, others had tears. I drew little doodles, stick figures of us at a carnival, or a crooked sketch of her first bike with streamers on the handlebars. I taped in things too. A movie stub from a film I never got to take her to. A birthday card I bought but never mailed. A photo of the lake where we used to fish when she was 5. One page just read, I missed your voice today. Another, I saw a girl who looked like you. I turned the car around to make sure it wasn't. And on her 13th birthday, happy birthday, kiddo. I left a cupcake on the bench by your school. You'll never know it was me, but that's okay. I started writing not just about the past, but about my life too. About how the tomatoes in my garden refused to grow that summer. About a book that made me cry. About Ellen, how I still set a place for her at Thanksgiving, even though it makes the meal harder to swallow. Writing became my ritual, my confession booth, my anchor. And even though I feared that Avery would never care to read a single line, I kept going. Because in writing to her, I was keeping the idea of her alive, keeping me alive. When the first journal filled up, I bought another, then another. By the time she turned 18, I had 5 full volumes stacked on my bookshelf. They weren't diaries. They were time capsules. Proof that I hadn't disappeared. Not really, just faded into the margins. On the morning of her 18th birthday, I stood in the post office parking lot holding the first journal. I debated for nearly an hour. My palms sweated through the brown paper wrapping. My heart pounded like I was handing over a grenade, not a notebook. I included a short note on the inside cover. This isn't a plea for forgiveness. It's just a record of the man who never stopped thinking of you. If you ever want to know him, he's in these pages. I mailed it without expecting anything in return. I didn't include a return address, just her name, the city, and a prayer that it would get there. I went home and sat in silence for hours. No music, no TV, just the ticking of the clock and the low hum of what hope sounds like when it's trying not to sound desperate. Days passed, then weeks. No reply. I told myself she never got it, that maybe it got lost in transit, that maybe she threw it away. But I kept writing. I started a new journal. Because if that first one was a map, this one would be the next chapter, just in case she ever chose to follow. I imagined scenarios. Her sitting on her bed, thumbing through the pages, laughing at my awkward jokes, crying at the parts where I apologized without saying sorry. Maybe she'd feel something, anything. Even hate was better than silence. Hate meant she read it. I didn't know until months later when I saw the post. My journal, my private lifeline, was on display. Scanned, shared, captioned with a sentence that cut deeper than any silence ever could. This man thinks he's my father. But before the sting, there was something else. A flicker. A crack in the wall I'd been staring at for over a decade. She had opened it. That meant, at least once, she had touched something I wrote, maybe read it with confusion, maybe disgust. But she read it. And now, whether she knew it or not, the words I'd buried for 10 years had finally found their way home. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I was making soup, the kind Ellen used to call salty hot water with vegetables, when my phone buzzed for the 3rd time that morning. I ignored the first 2. It was probably spam. But the 3rd was from Greg Whitmore, an old colleague from the high school where I used to teach. I hadn't heard from Greg in over 7 years. "Hey, Nate," he said, voice cautious. I just saw something online. I think it's about you." I paused mid-stir. "What do you mean?" "Instagram. Your daughter posted something. Look, I don't want to get in the middle of anything. Just check your name in the search bar. I thought you should know." He hung up before I could ask another question. I hadn't used Instagram in ages. The last time I logged in, I didn't even remember my password. It took me 15 minutes and a reset email to get in. My hands trembled as I typed my name into the search field. There it was, Avery's profile, still public, still under her childhood nickname, Ave Lane. The second post from the top was a carousel of 5 scanned pages. I recognized the handwriting immediately. The slant of the G's, the way I underlined certain words, the smudged edges where I'd pressed too hard. They were mine. 5 pages from the journal I'd mailed her. The caption read, "This man thinks he's my father." There were no emojis, no explanations, just that sentence. Comments were already pouring in. "He wrote you a whole novel? Creepy? This is kind of heartbreaking. At least he tried." "Nah, this gives stalker energy. TF. Imagine being this delusional. Girl, I wish my dad cared this much. This feels like trauma in cursive." I sat there, the soup boiling over onto the stove behind me, phone heavy in my hand, reading strangers argue about me like I was a character on a TV show. My words, meant only for her, were now dissected, judged, laughed at, pitied. It felt like being naked in the middle of a busy intersection. Cars honking, people staring, and I couldn't find my clothes. I didn't know what hurt more, that she posted it or that she chose that caption. "This man thinks he's my father." Not my father, not even my estranged father, just this man. The pages she chose weren't even the most vulnerable ones. She posted the softer entries, one about watching her from the car, another about a dream I had where she visited me for dinner. Harmless, compared to some, but still, deeply personal. It wasn't the betrayal I expected. It was more surgical than violent. No rage, no accusations, just a public offering with a title sharp enough to draw blood. I clicked on her profile again. There were hundreds of likes, dozens of shares. She hadn't posted in months before this, and now her story had traction. My journal, my lifeline, had gone viral. I checked my email. A subject line stood out. "Hey, are you the guy from Instagram?" Another one. "Just wanted to say, your writing is beautiful." Even if she doesn't see it yet. One more. "You should be ashamed. Leave her alone." I closed the laptop and walked outside. The winter air bit at my skin, but I needed to feel something sharp that didn't come from a screen. The neighborhood was quiet as usual. The old woman across the street was sweeping her porch. A dog barked somewhere behind the fences. Life hadn't changed, but something fundamental inside me had cracked. I sat on the steps and tried to make sense of it. She had read it. She had read enough to choose which pages to share. Enough to form a judgment. Enough to tell the world how little she thought of my gesture. And yet, a part of me clung to the smallest thread of hope. She read it. That alone was more than I'd had in over a decade. Still, the humiliation stung. I wasn't a celebrity. I wasn't built for the court of public opinion. I was just a man who wrote to his daughter every night. And now, that quiet ritual had become a public spectacle. By evening, more messages trickled in. Some kind, some cruel. A few from former students who recognized my handwriting and wrote to say they hoped Avery would understand someday. I didn't respond to any of them. I just reopened the latest journal and wrote, "Dear Avery, I saw your post. I read every word, even the ones that weren't written. I know you're angry. I probably deserve that, but for what it's worth, I never thought I was owed your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I never stopped being your dad. Not in my mind. Not in my heart." Then I closed the journal, turned off my phone, and sat in the dark. Let the world scream. I had nothing left to say, at least not out loud. The morning after the post, I did something I hadn't done in years. I typed her name into my phone and opened a new message. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, trembling, unsure. How do you respond to a rejection heard around the world? How do you speak to someone who's just used your most vulnerable gift to declare distance? I didn't overthink it. I didn't draft it 3 times. I just typed what I felt. Avery, I saw your post. I want you to know I'm sorry. If reading the journal hurt you, I truly didn't mean for it to. I never assumed you owed me anything, and I never believed I had the right to call you my daughter, but I've never stopped being your father, in the only way I knew how to be. I hope you'll understand that someday. I hit send before I could regret it, and then I waited. An hour passed, then 2. I checked to make sure it hadn't bounced. It hadn't. Delivered, but no reply. Her profile went dark after the post. No new content, no stories, no likes. Just a haunting silence that made every second feel heavier. By noon, the internet had decided who I was. Someone had cropped her post and tweeted it with the caption, "My dad tried to reappear by sending me a journal. Haven't seen him in 12 years. He thinks this makes up for it." That version went viral, shared over 30,000 times. No context, just outrage. Suddenly, I wasn't just a man with regrets. I was the self-appointed dad, the guilt tripper, the emotional manipulator disguised as a romantic. There were think pieces. One blogger wrote, "What's more dangerous? A deadbeat dad who leaves, or one who returns with emotional receipts?" Another called me the king of performative penance. They didn't know me. They didn't know the nights I screamed into pillows, the mornings I nearly drove across 2 states just to catch a glimpse of her smile. They didn't know how many times I stopped myself from calling, because I was more afraid of hurting her than of hurting myself. I wasn't angry. I was ashamed. Ashamed that something I had poured so much of my soul into had been twisted into a symbol of manipulation. Ashamed that I had been so naive to think love, even in its quietest form, could be received without suspicion. And yet, in the midst of all the noise, there was one message. Just one. From a woman I'd never met. Her comment was buried beneath the pile of vitriol, but it stopped me cold. She has no idea how lucky she is. My father vanished without a word and never looked back. I would have given anything for a single letter. One sentence, one sign he remembered me. Maybe this man isn't perfect, but at least he stayed present in the only way he could. I didn't know who she was. Her username was anonymous, her profile locked. But she said what I'd been afraid to say myself, that maybe, just maybe, intention still mattered. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened the second journal, the one I hadn't planned to send yet. The first page was blank. I wrote across the top, "Today, the world decided who I am, but I remember who I was when I held you for the first time. That moment still counts, even if you've erased it." I taped her hospital bracelet beneath the entry. The paper had yellowed with age, but her name was still legible. So was mine. Later that night, my email pinged again. This time, it wasn't hate. It was from someone who claimed to be a social worker in Minnesota. She'd seen the post. She'd read the comments, and she wrote, "I don't know your story, but I see a lot of them. Girls whose fathers never showed up, not even once. No photos, no gifts, no journals. Just an empty line on a birth certificate. Your daughter might not see the difference now, but it's there. Don't give up." I read that message 5 times before I let myself cry. Not the quiet, restrained tears I'd grown used to. These were loud, messy, full of 10 years' worth of words I couldn't fit into journal margins. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. Inside, the silence pressed against me like judgment. But for the first time since Avery's post went live, I felt something other than shame. I felt seen, not by the masses, not by my daughter, but by one stranger who understood that sometimes trying, even if it's too late, is still worth something. I couldn't sleep. 3 days had passed since Avery's post detonated across social media. The ridicule hadn't slowed, and neither had the silence from her. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that caption. "This man thinks he's my father," stamped across the inside of my skull. I needed to say something, not to the mob, not to defend myself, just to speak, clearly. One time. So I wrote. The piece was titled, "To the Girl Who Once Called Me Daddy." I uploaded it to Medium, not expecting much, just needing a place where the truth could breathe. For 10 years, I wrote to someone I wasn't sure would ever want to read a word from me. Not because I thought I deserved forgiveness, not because I believed a journal could fix the past, but because I wanted her to know, if she ever needed proof, I had stayed, in the only way I knew how. I don't want anything from her. Not a reunion, not a label, not even a conversation. All I ever wanted was for her to know she was never forgotten, not for one day. I ended it simply. 10 years of ink. Not to erase the past, but to remember it differently. I hope someday she reads it again, with less anger, with more softness, with eyes not taught to resent, but to understand. It sat there for hours, unnoticed. Then a blogger picked it up. I don't know how she found it. Maybe a keyword, maybe divine accident. But her article was titled, "The Dad Who Wrote Instead of Vanishing." It quoted parts of my letter, embedded screenshots from Avery's post, and ended with a question. What if silence isn't always absence? Suddenly, the tide shifted, just slightly. Comments started changing. A few at first. This made me cry. I judged too quickly. Why is it so hard for us to believe someone could love quietly? The article went semi-viral in its own right. Enough for the conversation to evolve from mockery to moral dilemma. It didn't redeem me, but it cracked open a door, and it reached Avery. I know, because 2 days later, someone sent her a photo. It wasn't from me. It wasn't doctored. It was a real, raw, blurry picture taken over a decade ago. Avery, 9 years old, standing near the chain-link fence behind her elementary school, wearing a red coat and laughing with another child. And in the background, barely visible, was a shadowed figure, a man, standing far enough away to be respectful, but close enough to see her smile. I remember that day. I remember the coat. I remember gripping the steering wheel in my parked car across the street, watching her run on the playground and thinking, she looks like her mother when she laughs. I never knew someone had captured it. The photo came from a woman in Portland. Apparently, her son had been in Avery's class, and she'd snapped the picture during a school picnic. She'd found it while organizing old digital albums. She saw the online commotion and recognized the girl instantly. The message she attached said, "I don't know the whole story, but he was there. That day. Quiet. Watching. Maybe that means something." Avery didn't respond publicly, but that same night, she removed her Instagram post. No explanation, no apology, just gone. I didn't celebrate. I didn't assume anything. But something had shifted. For the first time since the journal went viral, I wasn't just the villain in someone else's narrative. I was complicated, and maybe, just maybe, deserving of a second glance. I returned to my notebook that night and wrote, "Dear Avery, I saw the post is gone. I'm not reading into it. I know it doesn't mean forgiveness, but it means something changed, even if only a little. And sometimes, a little is everything. You were 9. Red coat, white sneakers. The chain link fence by the kickball field. I stood across the street that day, scared to wave. I didn't know anyone saw me. Maybe now you know. I was there. I've always been there." I closed the journal, set it beside my bed, and turned off the light. The world had not forgiven me. Avery had not spoken. My name still lingered in the corners of the internet, half sympathy, half suspicion. But the truth, finally, had a sliver of daylight. And sometimes, that's all it takes for something buried to begin growing. They say the internet forgets nothing. But for a few days, it seemed the world had moved on. The post was gone. The debates had cooled. The hashtag wars slowed to a whisper. And I, for the first time in weeks, felt like I could breathe again. Then came her interview. Avery appeared on a podcast hosted by a young journalist, known for tackling generational trauma and calling out fake apologies. It wasn't a surprise. The internet had made her a symbol. Everyone wanted to hear from the girl whose father wrote a decade of journals. Halfway through the episode, the host leaned in and asked, "Do you think he deserves a second chance?" Avery didn't flinch. Her voice was even, rehearsed. "I don't have a father," she said. "I have a man who left, then tried to rewrite the story with ink. That doesn't make him a parent. It makes him persistent." I listened in my kitchen, alone, the radio buzzing with her every word. That line, "I don't have a father," cut deeper than any post, any caption. It wasn't sarcastic. It was cold, final. The host responded, "But he did write to you for 10 years. Doesn't that count for something?" Avery paused for just a second. Then she said, "Maybe, if I'd known. But he didn't try hard enough. Or maybe he did, and my mom protected me. Either way, what difference does it make now?" I turned off the radio. The next sound I heard was porcelain shattering. The coffee mug in my hand slipping, hitting the counter, breaking clean in two. But this story wasn't mine anymore. Not in that moment. It was hers. And what happened next was never something I could have predicted. That night, Avery stormed into her childhood home in Oregon. Her mother, Linda, was setting out dinner. Soup and grilled cheese. Something simple. Avery didn't sit. She didn't touch her food. She placed her phone on the table, the podcast still playing faintly, and said, "Tell me the truth." Linda blinked. "About what? The letters? The packages? The journals? Did he ever send anything before now?" Linda hesitated, just long enough. Avery stepped forward, voice rising. "Did he write to me? Ever? Don't lie." There was no dramatic confession, no tears. Just a slow, guilty nod. "He sent letters. Around birthdays, holidays. I never gave them to you." Avery's breath caught in her throat. "Why?" Linda placed her napkin on the table, suddenly older, smaller. "You were hurting. I was trying to protect you." "From what?" Avery's voice cracked. "From knowing he cared? From hearing he remembered me?" "You cried every night for a year after he left," Linda said quietly. "Every night. You asked why he didn't call, why he didn't show up. I didn't have the answers. And when the letters came, I didn't know if opening that door would heal you or break you all over again." Avery took a step back. as if the room itself had betrayed her. "So you made that choice for me." "I did what I thought was right," Linda whispered. "No," Avery said. "You did what made you feel better." The silence that followed was suffocating. Avery turned and walked upstairs. She didn't cry. She didn't slam the door. She just sat on the edge of her childhood bed, heart pounding, memory unraveling. 15 years. 15 years of words she never read. Of birthdays spent thinking he'd forgotten. Of holidays filled with silence that wasn't his fault. She opened her laptop and searched her email for the name Nathaniel Brooks. Nothing. She looked in her mother's filing cabinet. Locked. She found the key under the old flower pot, just like when she was 10 and snooping for Christmas gifts. Inside the bottom drawer were envelopes, dozens of them, all unopened, some yellowed with age, some newer, each one handwritten, some addressed with shaky scrawl, others neat and deliberate. She sat on the floor and opened one. Inside was a drawing, stick figures, her in a graduation cap, him holding a bouquet. "Dear Avery, I won't be at your ceremony. I wish I could, but I'll be watching from the fence line. You deserve to shine without my shadow." She opened another, a pressed flower, a movie ticket, a note that read, "I bought 2 seats. I only used one. The other's still yours." By the time she finished the 5th letter, her hands were shaking. She wasn't angry anymore. She was hollow, because for the first time, she realized she had blamed the wrong person. And now, she didn't know who to be mad at. Her father, her mother, or herself. Morning light spilled through the kitchen window, warming the floor, but doing little to cut the chill in the room. Avery sat at the table, the box of letters between her and her mother. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Linda reached for a letter, her fingers trembling as they brushed the edge of the envelope. "I didn't throw them away," she said softly. "I couldn't. I couldn't give them to you either." Avery didn't look up. Her voice was flat. "Why not?" Linda inhaled slowly, like dragging air through water. "Because every time I said his name, you flinched. Because you cried yourself to sleep for months. You stopped talking about him, and I thought maybe that was healing. I thought silence was safer than disappointment." Avery finally raised her eyes. "You thought lying to me was love? I thought protecting you meant keeping the pain buried." Linda's voice cracked. "You were a child. You didn't need to carry his absence every birthday. I carried it anyway." Avery's chair scraped against the floor as she stood. Her voice shook with fury and confusion. "I thought he didn't care, that he forgot me, that he just walked away and never looked back. And the whole time, you had these, all of them." Linda stood too, face pale. "What would you have done with them at 10 or 15? You would have built castles out of hope and watched them collapse. I was trying to protect you from that." "But you didn't protect me," Avery shouted. "You just made me believe I wasn't worth remembering." Linda stepped forward. "That was never true." "No." Avery cut her off. "You don't get to rewrite this now." She grabbed the box of letters and turned toward the door. "Avery, please," Linda called after her. "I did my best. I really thought I was helping." Avery paused at the doorway, her voice low and raw. "Maybe you were, but it still hurt." Then she was gone. Back at her apartment, Avery sat on the living room floor, surrounded by envelopes, memories she never knew she had. She didn't turn on music, didn't answer her phone, just opened one letter after another, like peeling off layers of old skin. Some were short, I hope you danced today. I walked past a girl with your curls. I turned, hoping it was you. Others were long, pages of memories, questions, regrets written in a voice she barely recognized but couldn't stop reading. He had drawn things too. Her kindergarten lunchbox, a doodle of them fishing, a sketch of the dog she begged for when she was 6. Every page carried the same greeting, "Dear Avery." Every closing, the same words, "Love always, Dad." She wept, not the tidy, cinematic kind of crying. This was guttural, ugly, the kind that leaves your chest aching and your throat raw. Because somewhere between the 2nd and 7th letter, the anger stopped burning and started collapsing inward, folding into something heavier. Grief. Grief for the years spent hating someone who hadn't walked away. Grief for the man she thought had forgotten her, but hadn't. Grief for herself, the little girl who waited by the window for a knock that never came, not knowing the knock had been intercepted, redirected, silenced. And now he was more than a caption, more than a stranger's handwriting. He was a man who remembered the brand of her shoes, who marked her birthdays in ink, who bought 2 movie tickets and used only one. She reached for the journal, the one she had scanned, posted, ridiculed. She hadn't actually read it before? Not really. Just skimmed the pages, looking for evidence to confirm her resentment. This time, she started at the beginning. "You turned 8 today." She kept going. Every entry, every pause between words, every smudged corner felt like his voice reaching across time, asking, not to be forgiven, but to be heard. By midnight, she was curled up on the couch, the journal open across her lap, tears drying on her cheeks. The room was silent, but for the first time, her heart wasn't. She didn't sleep that night. The journal lay open beside her on the couch, its pages fluttering slightly whenever the air conditioning clicked on. It was almost morning, the sky outside bleeding from black to gray, when Avery finally reached the last entry. It was dated just weeks before she had posted the scans online. "Dear Avery, if you never forgive me, I will understand. If my absence speaks louder than any word I've ever written, I won't argue. If calling me father feels wrong, I won't ask you to. But if there's ever a day, just one, when you wonder whether you were loved, then this, all of this, is your answer. 10 years, every word, every scribbled drawing, every unfinished sentence. This is the only way I knew how to stay." She read it 3 times. By the 4th, her tears were silent, steady. No shaking shoulders, no gasps. Just water running from her eyes, as if a dam had cracked and didn't know how to stop. She sat there, cradling the journal like it was a piece of fragile evidence, proof of a life she had spent so long denying even existed. Her phone was on the coffee table. For hours, she stared at it, unsure. Her fingers hovered over the screen more than once. She drafted messages in her mind. "I'm sorry I posted it. I didn't know." I found the letters. I read them. But none of them felt right. It wasn't about an apology. Not yet. It was about making room. At 6:42 a.m., as the first golden rays crept across her apartment floor, Avery opened a blank message thread, found his name, Nathaniel Brooks, still listed as a contact under unknown. She typed, "If you're free tomorrow, would you like to have dinner?" Then she stared at it, debated 1,000 times, but she didn't delete it. She pressed send. The message whooshed into the ether, and with it, something lifted from her chest. Not the guilt, not the grief, but the weight of pretending she didn't care. Because she did. She always had. She just didn't know what to do with it. She thought about the phrase he used in one of his earliest letters. Absence isn't always a lack of love. Sometimes it's just the shape grief takes when it forgets how to speak. Her grief had always had a voice, sharp, sarcastic, dismissive. His had been quiet, inked onto paper, folded neatly into envelopes, delivered to an address that kept them sealed away. Both had been valid. Both had left scars. But as she lay on the couch, watching the sunlight inch toward the wall, Avery realized something else. Something that felt truer than anything she'd told herself for years. Hatred is a legacy too. It passes from one person to the next like a whispered curse. A torch lit by pain, carried with pride, and held up as proof of survival. But it also burns. And sometimes, the only way to stop the fire is to set the torch down. Avery didn't know if she was ready to forgive him, or her mother, or herself. But she knew she was tired of carrying the torch. She got up, stretched, and moved toward the kitchen. She started brewing coffee. 2 mugs. One for her, one for him, if he came. She wasn't even sure if the number still worked, but the message had gone through. That was something. Maybe it was everything. The door opened with a soft click. Nathaniel stood on the threshold, holding a bottle of apple cider and a nervous smile. He looked smaller than she remembered. Thinner, older, like someone who had weathered storms she hadn't seen, but could now almost recognize in his face. Avery stepped aside. "Come in." He nodded once and entered, glancing around the apartment like it was a museum of someone he used to know. The walls were soft cream, the floor oak. On the coffee table, his journal rested like a centerpiece neither of them dared touch. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken, garlic, and rosemary. A pot of mashed potatoes simmered gently on the stove. "You cooked?" he asked, surprised. She shrugged. "Didn't want our first real conversation to happen over takeout." He smiled faintly. "Smells like Sunday." She didn't ask what he meant, but she remembered Ellen's favorite comfort meal, roast chicken and mashed potatoes. He hadn't forgotten. They sat across from each other at the table. No music, no clinking silverware yet. Just silence and the shared weight of history pressing down between them. Avery broke it first, sliding the journal across the table. "I finished it?" He didn't touch it. "I didn't think you would." "I didn't think I could," she said. "But I did." He looked up then, and their eyes locked for the first time in 16 years. "I meant every word." "I know," she said. More silence. Not hostile. Just searching. He glanced at the food. "Can we eat?" She nodded, stood up, and served the plates without ceremony. Chicken, potatoes, green beans. She poured the cider. He didn't say thank you, but not out of rudeness, out of disbelief. They began eating, quietly. Midway through the meal, she said, "You still hum when you chew." He froze, then smiled. "I do? You always did. I'd forgotten." They chewed in silence for another few minutes. Finally, he placed his fork down and spoke. "I don't expect you to call me Dad. I just hope you won't call me a stranger." She didn't respond right away. Then softly, "You're not a stranger." He looked up. "You're just someone I never got the chance to understand." He exhaled deeply, as if he'd been holding that breath for years. Avery sipped her cider. "Why didn't you fight harder?" He didn't flinch. "Because your mother had already lost so much. And I was afraid you'd get caught in a tug of war. I thought stepping back was mercy. You were wrong, she said, not cruelly, just stating a fact. I know. She toyed with her fork. Why the journal? Why not just show up? I didn't want to make your life harder, or hers. I thought writing was safer. For you or for me? He smiled bitterly. Both. They sat in it. The honesty, the simplicity, the ache. She leaned back in her chair. Some pages made me angry. I imagined they might. Some made me cry. His throat tightened. And some, she said, made me wonder who I could have been if I'd read them sooner. A silence heavier than guilt followed. He didn't try to fill it. After a while, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I brought this to show you, she said. He took it with shaking hands. It was the photo, the one from the school fence, her in the red coat, the blurry man in the distance. He stared at it for a long time. I remember that day, he whispered. You laughed so loud, it echoed off the trees. She nodded. I never knew you were there. I didn't know someone had captured it. She looked at him. You really tried, didn't you? He didn't answer, just blinked hard and nodded. They finished their meal. When the plates were empty and the cider gone, she stood and gathered the dishes. He tried to help, but she waved him off. At the sink, over the sound of running water, she asked, Will you come again? Next week, maybe? He hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of awe. I'd like that, he said. She smiled to herself, a small, private smile. Maybe they'd never be what they could have been. But maybe, just maybe, they could still become something neither of them had the words for yet. Avery stared at the blank caption box for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart thudding as if she were standing on the edge of a ledge, about to leap into something she couldn't take back. Again. But this time, it wasn't fear that held her still. It was responsibility. She had started the fire. It was only right she tried to contain it. She deleted the old post first, the one with the scanned pages and the cutting caption, This man thinks he's my father. Gone. Like it had never existed. But she didn't stop there. She tapped New Post. This time, it was just a photo of the journal. Closed. Resting on her lap. A cup of coffee beside it. No filters. No flourishes. And the caption read, He wrote for 10 years. I only needed 10 minutes to read. And maybe the rest of my life to understand. She hit post. Nothing exploded. There were no fireworks. No dramatic applause. Just the soft ding of a story going live and a notification banner disappearing into the corner of the screen. But the ripple started almost immediately. First, a few quiet likes. Then comments. I'm crying. This is what healing looks like. I judged too quickly. Thank you for this. Then came the messages. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. People sharing their own stories. Of absent fathers. Of misunderstood parents. Of the ache of silence that filled years of their lives. One person wrote, Your first post made me furious. This one made me hopeful. Another, I'm mailing the letter I've been writing for 5 years. Thank you for giving me the push. And somewhere along the way, someone started a hashtag. Read, before, you judge. It spread like wildfire. People began sharing letters from their parents, screenshots of old texts, voicemails, even unopened birthday cards they'd kept hidden in drawers for years. A wave of reflection and reckoning swept through social media like a long overdue tide. Suddenly, Avery wasn't a villain or a victim. She was a mirror. And through her, people were finally seeing themselves. She didn't try to control it. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't try to rewrite what she'd done, only reframe it, and the world responded. So did the media. Within 72 hours, 3 podcasts reached out. Then came the radio show. A nationally syndicated station known for its human interest segments wanted to feature her story. But not just hers. They wanted him, too. Father and daughter live together. When the producer called, Avery hesitated. "I don't know if he'll want to," she said. "We'd love to have you both," the voice said. "We think the public needs to hear it from the source. No edits, no captions, just your voices." She called Nathaniel that night. He answered on the second ring. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi. There's something I want to ask." She explained the offer, the show, the timing. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Do you think it'll help?" "I think it might," she said. "Not just for us, for others." He chuckled softly. "Then I'll be there." The studio was in Portland. They met outside the building, both holding warm cups from the same cafe, but pretending they hadn't coordinated. He wore a dark sweater and clean jeans. She wore no makeup, a navy blue jacket, and the necklace he'd once sent that she'd never worn before. The show opened with the host introducing them, not as guests, but as witnesses, to time, to change, to the long, uneven road to connection. They didn't speak in rehearsed lines. There were no dramatic reveals, just honesty. Avery talked about anger, about the years of silence, about the pain of thinking she was unchosen. Nathaniel talked about guilt, about fear, about how hard it is to knock on a door when you think you're the last person welcome behind it. Then the host asked, "What would you say to people listening who are still carrying hurt they haven't unpacked?" Avery looked at her father. He looked back. She said, "Pain is real. So is distance. But hatred? Hatred is heavy. And most of the time, we don't even realize we're the ones carrying it until someone shows us what it's like to set it down." The host nodded, and the world listened. When they stepped out into the sunlight afterward, they didn't hug. They didn't cry. They just walked side by side. 2 people who had finally decided to stop running in opposite directions. The studio lights weren't blinding, just soft and warm, casting a quiet glow over the 2 chairs in the center. No flashy stage, no dramatic backdrop, just a round table, 2 microphones, and 2 people who had spent more time apart than together. The host leaned forward. "We've been talking a lot about forgiveness lately, but let's start with something simpler. Understanding. Can you tell us how it all began?" Nathaniel cleared his throat. "It didn't begin with anger. It began with fear. I was afraid I'd do more harm by staying than by stepping back, so I stayed away. And that silence, it grew teeth." Avery nodded beside him. "And on my end, it felt like abandonment. I didn't know the silence came from fear. I just thought he didn't care, so I built walls." The host looked between them. "You've both said this publicly before, but today feels different. You're saying it together. Why now?" Avery took a breath. "Because I read the journal, all of it. And I saw a man who never stopped trying, even if he failed. And I had to ask myself, is it fair to judge someone by the version of them I never even met?" Nathaniel's voice was quieter this time. "And I realized I'd spent years writing to a ghost version of my daughter. One that didn't grow up, that didn't change. I never made space for who she might become." The host leaned back, giving them room. They talked about the years in between, the birthdays missed, the letters hidden, the post that went viral. Avery laughed once, bitter and soft. "I weaponized something sacred. I didn't even read it first. I just reacted. Loudly. Publicly. Nathaniel didn't flinch. You had every reason to. I was just grateful you opened it at all. They talked about the fence photo, about the moment Avery realized she'd been wrong. Not just about him, but about the entire narrative she had built around him. You don't know what you don't know, she said. But once you do, you get to choose differently. The host gestured toward the microphones. You're both sitting here today, after everything. That says something. What would you say to people listening who have someone they've written off? Someone they think doesn't deserve another chance? Avery turned to the mic, thoughtful. Start by asking why. Why do you still carry that anger? Is it protecting you? Or just keeping you from healing? Nathaniel added, and ask what silence really means. Sometimes it's cruelty, but sometimes it's someone trying not to cause more pain. You won't know until you listen. The show ended, not with applause, but with stillness. Listeners at home didn't cheer. They sat with the words, with the pauses between them, with the story of two people who had every reason to stay apart and still chose to meet in the middle. The studio received over 1,000 messages within the first hour. One stood out. A woman wrote, "My ex-husband used to write letters to our daughter. I never gave them to her. I thought I was protecting her. Today, I'm putting them in a box and driving them over. Thank you for showing me that maybe she deserves to read them." There were others. I haven't spoken to my dad in 8 years. I'm texting him right now. I always thought my silence was justice. Maybe it was just fear. Thank you for being brave in front of all of us. That night, Avery and Nathaniel sat in the same small diner they had passed walking out of the studio. 2 mugs of coffee between them. No cameras, no scripts, just a father and daughter. You did well, he said. So did you. She stirred her coffee. Do you think people really change? He smiled. I think people remember how to try. She looked out the window. The city lights blinked. A couple laughed on the sidewalk. Life continued, ordinary and luminous. Avery turned back to him. I don't know where this goes. Us. We don't have to know, he said. We just have to keep showing up. She nodded. And for once, that was enough. They never talked about what to call him. Not after the radio show, not after the flood of messages, and not even after the first dinner turned into a second, then a third. The word dad never passed her lips, and Nathaniel never asked for it. And strangely, that made it easier, because what they were building didn't need a label. Not yet. It needed space, patience, and a willingness to let things grow where silence had once taken root. On Saturdays, they went walking. Nothing fancy. Just long, slow strolls through the park near Avery's apartment. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. Once, they spent an entire hour pointing out dogs and making up names for them. Sergeant Waffles was a favorite. One weekend, she brought home a small potted plant, a wilting fern from a clearance rack. I think I killed it, she said, holding it up like a lost cause. Nathaniel examined the leaves. It's not dead. It just forgot what the sun feels like. They repotted it together on her balcony. 2 pairs of dirt-streaked hands fumbling with soil and roots, laughing when the pot cracked, and they had to improvise with a coffee tin. It became a ritual. Each visit, they added something new. Basil, rosemary, a stubborn tomato plant that refused to bloom until Nathaniel whispered to it, "You're safe now." Avery rolled her eyes, but didn't stop him. When it rained, They stayed in, played cards. She taught him a game called Spite and Malice, which, to her delight, he lost repeatedly. He claimed he let her win. She never believed him. They started sharing things: books, recipes, little stories from the week. He told her about his neighbor's cat, who had adopted him uninvited. She told him about the student in her writing class who wanted to become a poet because sadness makes good sentences. Neither of them brought up the past often, not because they were avoiding it, but because it had finally stopped being the only thing between them. One afternoon, as they watered the balcony plants, Avery handed him a cup of iced tea and said, "I told my therapist I've been spending time with you." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "What did she say?" "She asked if I'd started calling you Dad yet." He froze, unsure how to answer, but Avery just smirked. "I told her no, but I also told her something else." "What's that?" She glanced at the basil leaves swaying in the breeze, then back at him. "That maybe I don't need to call you Dad right now. Maybe Dad still feels too loaded, too tangled. But I told her this: I call you someone I trust." His eyes stung, but he smiled. "That might be better than Dad." "Don't push your luck," she teased. They laughed, and the wind picked up, rustling through the growing garden around them. Later that day, as he packed up to leave, Avery handed him a small envelope. "Don't open it until you get home," she said. He nodded, tucked it into his coat, and kissed her cheek, tentatively, like asking permission without words. She didn't pull away. At home, he opened the envelope. Inside was a photo, the one from the school fence. But this time, there was something new. Beneath the picture, written in Avery's handwriting, were just 4 words: "I see you now." The final pages of the journal were harder to write, not because the words were more difficult, but because they were no longer meant for someone who might never read them. They were for someone who now sat across the table, helping water basil or shuffle cards. Someone who no longer existed, only in memory. Nathaniel wrote anyway, less often, but with more peace. His handwriting steadier, his sentences shorter. One entry simply read, "Today, she asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I said yes. We both fell asleep halfway through." Another, "The tomatoes finally bloomed. She took 3 home. Said they tasted better because she helped." He wasn't recording hope anymore. He was recording life. And one morning, he wrote something different. Not to Avery, but to anyone who might one day find the words and wonder what they meant. If you're holding on to a journal you've written for someone, don't wait forever to send it. Don't let the fear of being rejected stop you from being known. Sometimes, silence feels like protection, but over time, it hardens into distance, and distance doesn't keep people safe. It keeps them apart. He paused, then underlined the next sentence. Say what you need to say before it echoes in an empty room. Weeks passed. The seasons shifted, leaves turned, mornings cooled. Their walks grew shorter, their conversations longer. One crisp afternoon, Nathaniel didn't show up. Avery called. No answer. She drove to his house, found him sitting on the couch, pale but breathing. He'd felt dizzy, he said, a little tired, nothing serious. Still, she insisted on a checkup. At the hospital, they ran tests, kept him overnight. She stayed with him, brought books, made bad jokes, sat beside his bed with her legs pulled up into the chair, the way she used to sit when she was nervous as a kid. There wasn't much to do. No dramatic diagnosis, just precaution. But something about the stillness made her think. About time, about absence, about what it cost and what it gave back. She reached for his hand, held it gently. No words. He looked at her, tired but alert, met her gaze. And in that quiet moment, no cameras, no captions, no noise, something passed between them that needed no explanation. They were not a perfect family. They were not healed completely, but they were here, together, and that was enough.